this is me, heart and soul. Here's a part of me the world may never know. Here's my story. When I lose, I let my guard down. Here's the naked truth. I let my guard down. Here's the naked truth. I let my guard down. I let my guard down. I let my guard down. Here's the naked truth.
My people, what is going on? Welcome back. It is Thursday night. It is 9 o'clock on the East Coast, 6 o'clock on the West Coast, and you can figure it out in between. But what you do know is that it is time for another episode of the Naked Truth Experience, y'all. This is episode 23. I keep calling out those numbers because you know what? I can't wait until we get to episode 100, but I am grateful and thankful for every single number in between. If you are joining us for the first time, I want to welcome you. If you are joining us for the 23rd time or any time in between that, I want to welcome you back. It is so amazing to be able to be on this platform from week to week to week and to be able to have these transformative conversations with people that I love, people that I respect, and people that I admire. And most importantly, you keep coming back. You keep joining the conversation. So that's what's most important. So listen here tonight, y'all. We are talking about being Black and privileged. That is tonight's show, being Black and privileged. And I'm going to go back into that in a minute. But I understand that tonight we might ruffle a few feathers. But let me say this. It is not intended, right, to browbeat anybody or to make anybody feel bad or anything like that. But I want to have a real conversation about privilege in the Black community, right? And we've got some heavy hitters tonight. But first and foremost, I want you to keep typing in those comments. Let us know who you are. Talk to your neighbors. Talk to your community members. Let them know where you are viewing from. It is so important. I see everybody all over the United States who are coming back week to week to week. And we also got some folks that are in other countries. So let us know where you are hailing from, where you are viewing from. Let us know, is this your first time? We want to welcome you. Also, let us know if you're sipping on something. I'm sipping on something, as I do every week, a little bit of wine, and we'll talk about that in a moment. But let us know what you're sipping on, right? We always like to make it real fun, light, and easy here because we do definitely dive into the conversation. Now, I want you to remember that in order for this show to continue, we need to hear from you. And the ways that we can hear from you are on our social media. So please like, share, comment, subscribe. We're on Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube. Hopefully you're viewing right now from either YouTube or Facebook, right? And I hope some of my Instagram friends have migrated their way on over to YouTube and Facebook to watch us. But please, please, please spread the message, y'all. Spread the message. Keep in those comments because your comment might be featured tonight. If you have a question, if something resonates with you, or if something doesn't make you feel good and you want to tell us about it, go ahead and get in those comments. Our producer will, he'll be screening those comments, and there's a great chance that you might be able to get featured, and we'll definitely talk about it. The last thing that I really want you to do is join our Facebook group. This is our brand new Facebook group. And I'm telling you, as it grows, the community will grow. This is where the conversation continues. After the show, we're going to keep talking about some of these subjects. And I want to hear from you. What's relevant? What's important to you, y'all? So while we're doing that, while you're getting something else, I want to tell you what I'm sipping on tonight. Now, I'm going to mess this name up, but just bear with me. So tonight, I'm sipping on a Monte del Fra Lena de Mezzo. Now, you see that whole name up in there. It's just like my name, Monroe Aaron Devon Howard Shackelford. But I'm not about to try to pronounce that wine because y'all not going to make me look crazy on this show tonight. So I'm just going to give you the easy part that I was able to practice and get right before we come on. So again, get in those comments. Let us know where you're hailing from and let us know what you're sipping on. Now, I'm so excited to go ahead and introduce our guest for tonight. I want to start with someone who I love, admire, and respect so greatly. I want to welcome Dr. Stacey Ault, founder, CEO, assistant professor. Stacey, what's going on? How are you tonight?
Hey, Monroe,
Um,
I'm here.
Listen, you know this is homecoming, so I'm so excited to talk to you, and you're going to be up first, so I'm going to come right back to you real
I
soon.
got you. Thank you for
That's what's
having
up.
me.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And then next we have a brother, again, who I met not too long ago, about a year and a half ago. And I'm so excited to have him on the show tonight. His name is Dr. Roderick Carey. And Dr. Roderick is also an assistant professor and an educational researcher. Roderick, where you at, brother? How you doing, man? You gotta unmute yourself, brother. You know how we do here. Listen.
My bad. Well, yo, man, thank you so much for having me. It's such an honor to be here to build with y'all.
Listen, man, I'm so looking forward to our conversation tonight. Rod, before the show, he was like, hold up, I got to get this lighting right. Y'all not about to show me up with this lighting. So, brother, we see you shining.
Thank you so much.
I'll be with you on the second part of our conversation. All right, man?
Absolutely. Thank you.
All right. And then definitely, finally, but definitely not least, this brother right here. I love this brother. I have so much respect for him. He is a content creator. He is a thought leader. My brother, Donovan Thompson. Now, Donovan's been having a little, oh, he's right there. Okay. What's up,
going
Donovan?
on? I'm here.
Yes, brother.
Here.
Listen, isn't that what they said in The Color Purple? When she hit that long note, she said, I'm here. You know what I'm saying? All night. Y'all, this is my brother Donovan. We're having a little bit of technical trouble, but we're going to get it together. So again, that is our panel for tonight. I'm going to talk with each one of them individually. And then we are going to, that's my dad, y'all. Cecil Shackelford. He's so proud of his son. And I love my dad, y'all. Love you too, Pops. Quentin, what's up, baby? Good to see you. All right, now. So we're going to go ahead and get started, y'all. My brother, see, I'm getting all this love and I can't even get the show started. That's my brother, Ken Austin Jr. and everybody else. Let's bring on Stacey, because I'll be here all day just having a homecoming. Stacey, where you at? Where you at?
I'm here in SAC. I'm sipping on my house red.
Come on, House Red.
It's on tap.
It's on tap. Come on. What's the name? Is that the Sugar Shack over there? You in the Sugar Shack? Is that what that is?
Hey, listen. No.
Stacey, what is going on?
I'm home. I might be calling. If you see me raise my glass and it's empty, just know that one of them kids, one of them youngins,
but listen,
bring me a little something.
This is what I'm saying. You are at the Sugar Shack. If you got somebody on staff waiting, that's what I'm talking about. I'm over here. I got to pour my own sip, but that's all right. We'll be okay. Listen, Stacey, I want to thank you so much for being here. First of all, you know how much I love. You know, it's all love. Like, for those of you who may not know, like, this is family. We met several years ago, both doing work in the Sacramento City Unified School District. But this woman here, who I respect and admire so much, has done so much for our community. Now, I introduced her as Dr. Stacey Ault, but from here on forth, I will be referring to her as Stace, because that's how I know her affectionately. And she is also affectionately known in this community as Mama Stacey, because Mama Stacey has done so much for our young people, and not so much in the fact of like that they're broken, or so much in the fact of like that they're not able to do for themselves. But Stacey believes inherently in the beauty and the magnificent nature of our young people. And she shows that every single day in her work and her commitment. And let me tell you something else. The reason why I love you so much, Stacey, is because you've always been real. You've always been authentic. You've never been afraid to show your story, to tell your story in the midst of hopefully to help somebody else. And so I'm just honored to have you on here, and just so delighted. I know
I love you. I
love you too. Stacey, so we're talking about being Black and privileged, and what does that mean? Now, Stacey, you are a professor, assistant professor in the Department of Social Work at Sacramento State University, both of our alma maters. Yes, okay.
Hey.
What did they say? Stingers up? Is that what they say? Stingers up? Yes, there we go. Okay. AKAs, don't get mad out here. Listen, that's what they do at the college. Stingers up. So I don't want no hate mail. But so Stace, now when I approached you about talking about being Black and privileged, what was your first thought about even that subject? What did you think?
You know, we talk about this all of the time in the work that we do with young people, and notice privilege and all of its intersections, right? All of its ugly intersections. I feel like even my ability to sit here and have this conversation with you is privilege, right? And so celebrating those opportunities, and then realizing like the ugliness that comes with when we abuse that privilege and that power. Yeah. And when you do work with young people, like, you see that all the time. And I think that's where my mind usually goes first.
Okay.
Is ageism and adult privilege?
Yeah.
Right.
So
And how, go ahead.
so does privilege have a negative connotation? Do I hear you saying privilege may have a negative connotation for you or for any others? Because a lot of times when we hear privilege, we automatically think white privilege. And so
Right.
that's one of the questions that I'm going to pose tonight for us, and we can answer throughout the night. But like, in the context of a world riddled with white privilege, what does it even mean to be Black and privileged? What does
Yeah.
that even mean?
Well, we don't spend time unpacking that often, do we? And so then I think similarly to white folks, when we don't understand our privilege and examine that and unpack that and own that in every space we're in, even with each other, especially with each other,
Yeah,
I
come on.
think that that's when it becomes dangerous,
Yeah.
right? Like
This-
when I'm walking around, what did Shirley Chisholm say? Like the racism is so normalized, is the air we breathe is so normal in this country. It's so widespread that it's normal, right?
Yeah.
And we know this and we'll call that out.
Yeah.
But when we talk about class privilege, educational privilege,
Yeah.
heteronormativity and
Yeah.
heterosexual privilege,
Come
privilege,
on, right, just that.
when we go there with all of those other things, it's harder for those of us who have been oppressed
Yeah.
to recognize that we also carry privilege in many spaces as well.
So, Stace, in your classroom, because when we had our pre-interview, you talked about this is something that you bring up and you talk about in your classroom all the time. What are y'all talking about? How do you begin to unpack this, the privilege in our community?
So I teach race, class, and gender to undergraduate students. It's a social work course. I'm in the social work division. So understanding privilege in social work is also really important, right? Because of our power. Yeah. And we start with thinking about all of those intersections of our identity. Like, who are you? Yeah. Right? And that's where I usually begin with the students because they can understand that part, right? They can understand, usually you start with surface stuff. Yeah. Right? Like I'm Black and I'm female and I'm, a student or a professor. Yeah. But as time goes on, when you start really digging deep into who you are and examining the relationship between those intersecting identities and oppression or privilege, now you can begin to look at the world differently, realizing, right, that at any moment I may be I may be oppressed and privileged, right? Wow. So as a Black female professor, when I show up in my classrooms, I have the privilege and the power of being the professor, right? Yeah. I may also have the oppressive experiences of being a Black woman in a space with, say, for example, white male, middle class students who hold more power than me, except for in this space, right? So one of the tendencies of many of us, especially teachers, we did the education thing, like we come from the field of education, and there's a tendency that if we haven't examined and unpacked that privilege, that then we try to hold on to that power. Yeah, and
so let's stay there for a minute. When you're talking about holding on to that power, people who are oppressed, because one of the things is that I have witnessed in certain instances within our community is because we are oppressed in so many of these other spaces, that where we do have privilege and power, and sometimes we abuse that privilege and that power and end up oppressing other people. So if we talk about even within the Black community, let's talk about like gender, like, privilege, right? And so being a Black man, even though I'm a Black man who is, despised, feared, oppressed in a lot of different spaces, maybe when I come home to my space, if it's a heterosexual relationship and I'm married to a woman or I'm partnered with a woman, then I may look at the privilege of being male and lord that in my home or in that domain, and how that can potentially become oppressive to the Black woman who I am partnered with, right, at that time. So talking about that, like, talk a little bit more about like the danger of oppressed people with privilege.
Well, I think even before we get there, we need to talk about how difficult it is for us to even recognize that. Right. And as much as we go after white folks about examining and unpacking their privilege and call them out when they don't, it's it can be very difficult. The example you use, right, is patriarchy, right?
Yeah.
And the power that you have as a Black male identified cis male, right?
Yeah, right.
You have privilege in that space.
Yeah.
And yet things can happen, and unless you're really attuned or aware of that, you may be exerting that male privilege without even recognizing that
Wow.
you're doing it.
Wow.
You know, you and my partner are like, that's your bae, right? That's your bromance.
My bromance right there.
So
Yeah.
he and I argue about patriarchy a lot.
Yeah.
And I think what I realized in the beginning arguments was that he hasn't ever been taught to notice that.
Mm.
So we'll give an example of I don't know, maybe he would come home and talk about a situation that he experienced and describe it in some way.
Yeah.
And then I'll say, "Ooh, patriarchy much?" Right? And he'll be like, "What do you mean? That's not there. We're talking about Blackness." And so it can be difficult for us to really lean into that. So I think that's the first step, right? And then the second piece is, power is, especially in these United States, and really globally, I think we're seeing now, we can get hungry for that. It can feed us, and it can feel good when you have some power over some stuff, especially when you're out of control in so many ways in your life, right? And so asking me to give up some of that, that's it. Ugh.
Yeah, it's tough. It's tough. And especially, again, if there are spaces and places where it is very apparent and it is told to me and it is reinforced over and over again about how I ain't shit in these other spaces, right? In these other spaces that I go into. And so we can talk about the trauma that comes along with that and how that trauma then will perpetuate or maybe the impetus for me acting out in certain ways, especially as a Black male, if I am not seeking the healing spaces and supports, or I'm not receiving the healing spaces and supports for me to be able to process that. Because then again, I may yield or wield my power in different places and spaces. That's not this show, but I just wanted to drop that in there because we talk about that a lot. But I wanted to move forward just a little bit and say, okay, so in your classroom, once you've identified these intersectionality, right, of your identity, and you have this conversation about your privilege, once we've gotten to the place of recognition, where do we move from there? How do you move the conversation?
Yeah, so in the class this week, they should be coming to class tomorrow with kind of their identity star. We call it a star, and it's got their name in the middle, and they're thinking about all those intersections and how they navigate privilege and oppression. And then we start looking at the history of that, right? Especially, and I teach at Sacramento State University. In fact, is one of the most diverse cities in the world. We're a predominantly white institution by history, but we're an extremely diverse community, right? Like a lot of Latinx folks, some Black students in my class, not enough. So if you're at Sac State, you need to come see me.
Go see her. Go see her.
A lot of Asian students, right? A lot of diversity. And so it's really important, I think, then for us to do a little of our homework, right? Audre Lorde, who's one of my favorites, says that that sometimes it becomes like the sole role of the oppressed to try to teach the oppressor about their oppression, right? And we take that on. And so we got to stop doing that. We got to stop expecting us to tell you, right, Black folks to tell white folks how oppressed we are and talk about our trauma. And so in the class, I put it on us to do our homework. Once we've identified those areas of privilege, if we think about class privilege, right, and educational privilege, it's an eye opener for my students who don't feel real privileged right about now. Right. But
that's real.
As they move up into the middle class, education is one of the fastest ways to have upward class mobility, right? And so as they move into the middle class, what is that going to mean for your space and how you interact with folks? And how are you going to remember this privilege that you've not just earned, because you've worked hard as hell.
That's right.
But you also, the system has been set up for a few of us to get through.
Stace,
that-
no,
Yeah. Okay. All right. I'm gonna write that down and come back.
no, because we're gonna come back to this. We're gonna come back to our panel discussion. So I'm gonna need you to hold some of that goodness back for just a moment. Listen, we've got a comment before you get off. Our producer says we have a comment. Let's see. Dr. Kimberly Crenshaw coined the term intersectionality to speak to our various identities and how we all experience privilege and oppression based on context. And thank you so much, Shelly Champion, for doing that, because sometimes that, people may have heard that word intersectionality, but not necessarily know exactly what that means. And I remember when I started my grad program for my social work program, intersectionality came up like almost instantaneously. And I can say I wasn't as familiar with it, but it really did help me to really unpack, as you were talking about in your classroom, and really identify all of the things that make up Monroe. And what are some of the spaces and what are some of the identities of Monroe that are privileged? And it really started me on this road to check what I say sometimes, check what I do, and check where that's coming from. Not as a place of like malintent or anything like that, but sometimes that privilege just comes on out and you got to wield that back and just say, hold on now, wait a minute. Because I've had to also understand that the words that I may speak may be very insensitive to the brothers and sisters of which I identify with. And I don't think that we always take that into consideration because we we all Black. That don't mean nothing just because we all Black. That doesn't mean you can just say any and everything and that those words may not have the toxicity and the venom that somebody else outside of the community can say. And sometimes it hurts worse when you hear it from your own. I'm gonna stop right there. We're gonna move on to the next person. Stace, I'll see you shortly. Thank you so much. Love you. Okay, y'all. Keep those comments coming. Dr. Rod Carey, where you at, sir? Where you at?
Good evening. Good evening. How are you?
I'm good, man. How are you?
Man, I'm trying to recover from that brilliance that was coming at me.
Listen, brother.
From your first guest, Stacey. Well done, sis.
listen, man. Let's just jump on into the conversation now. You're at the University of Delaware. Yeah,
I am. So I'm coming at you from Newark, Delaware.
yeah. And so you're in Delaware. Yeah, right. When people think of Newark, New Jersey, there's a Newark. Is that how they pronounce it in Delaware? Newark.
Newark, Delaware. Yes.
Newark, Delaware. Okay, I got you. And then what do you teach at the University of Delaware? So
I teach courses. I'm in the College of Education and Human Development, but I teach courses in Human Development and Family Sciences. Yeah. So I teach courses on stressors, family stressors. Yeah. I teach courses on mentoring, and I also teach a course on working with children and families who are placed at risk. And I want to emphasize who are placed at risk. The course was titled "Children and Families at Risk." But I like to reframe it to children and families placed at risk because it activates the agent who is doing the oppression, who is creating the failure that these families and children navigate on a day-to-day basis, right? Yeah. So I teach similar courses. I teach courses to what I call baby social workers, students who want to go off and help people, So.
Dope. So when I hit you up again, man, we were sipping on something in Costa Rica at that time. Yeah, I think I was still drinking liquor at that time, so I had more than wine. But I remember just having a dope conversation with you and your lovely wife, man, and I'm so glad to have you on. Where does Black and privileged, where does that sit for you? Because and I want to kind of dig in even personally, right? You have a terminal degree, you know what I'm saying? I was fortunate enough to press my way through to get a master's degree, but I was able to get in. So I recognize just me being a Black man and with the level of education I've been able to attain, like and that, as Stacey was talking about. Before we dive into some of it, like, what does being Black and privileged mean to you personally?
Yeah, honestly, some of the same things that, you and Stacey were talking about in the previous section. I think a lot about the fact that I was handed so much from my parents, who were handed stuff by their parents. And I feel like I've been trying to do a little bit more than what they probably were able to do. And I hope that I'll give my child, more, what I was able to do. And I think that is kind of the essence of, this, I don't want to say trickle down effect of privilege, but I think that there's an inheritance. And I think that the challenge with being, Black and privileged is that, for me, and I would say probably a lot of other folks who have been able to attain some, a little bit of education, a little graduate education, is that, they're folks who I love and who I'm directly related to, who absolutely were not able to do that for various reasons. I was a high school English teacher in Washington, D.C., and, I saw my students who came from really, really, really challenging situations maneuver various contexts in order to get to college. Some have been able to go on to grad school. And then there are also some that were not able to do that.
Yeah.
And I think a lot about this notion of what happens when a Black person, who does not come from tremendous amounts of wealth, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
What happens to them when they make it, quote unquote, to graduate school or just to a job that pays pretty well or whatever. Yeah. And I think like what happens is that you end up straddling. I write about this in a book chapter about this notion of straddling. Like you're kind of in both worlds at the same time. And for anybody who knows anything about straddling, you don't have to be a dancer or a gymnast to know that when you straddle things or a horseback rider, you get tired.
Yeah.
It's like you're split in half, because you can go off and do whatever it says, or get a house, get a car, with all this, but how can you be liberated if people in your community are suffering? You know what I mean? So I feel like for me, when I think about privilege as a Black man, I always think about straddling. And if it's not people I'm related to, it's people who I see who look like me. Yeah. I don't know George Floyd, but when that man was struck down, I felt that, you know what I mean? And I think that's what happens when you're Black and privileged. These degrees, I got degrees, that don't matter. In that moment, I felt that. I felt that cold cement on my face, the way he probably felt that. What is it about me that I was able to not suffer that? Or what would it take for me to be there? Wow. You know what I mean? So I can go on and on about that.
No. But you know what this leads us into? When we were talking in our pre-conversation, you were talking about this myth, right? The pull yourself up by your bootstraps, right? And yeah. I know that a lot of times we think of that in context of, a white person saying, "Oh, you're in this graduate school program with me. Oh, well, that means it's accessible to everybody." I've heard that before, right? And I'm like, hold on, let me check you right here, right now, because there's this place in where like I'm not differentiating myself, like you said, from any of the brothers. I'm back home in Sacramento, California. There's a spot called G Parkway where I grew up. 916 was good on the south side of Sacramento, a lower income area that had all of the ills of society that we talk about with crime and drugs and all this other kind of stuff, right? And so what I recognize is that what I've been able to do to come from G Parkway was not because I was so special, right? Yeah. But I do recognize points of privilege.
Yeah,
I do recognize points of privilege and access that I was given that allowed me to X amount of years later be in this space. So how do we address that same kind of pull yourself up by your bootstraps when it's coming from Black folks, from other Black folks?
Ooh, man, that's a complicated question. And, and I think, getting back to, some of the things that like Stacey was talking about, I think a lot about intersectionality. And, what ends up happening with an intersectional framework is that, there's two types of ways to look at it. Race, class, privilege, you're kind of living it, right? The other part is that when you are given privilege, or when you have privilege because of various identity facets, you are given a closer proximity to power. And I think that the ways that activates in the lives of children who are given those violin lessons, who then get the violin lessons, who get first chair, who get the chance to tour, who end up going to Atlanta and seeing, oh my goodness, there's a college called Spelman College. I can go to Spelman College. Wow, I've never thought of this. And there's Black women out here that look like me, but who do this and who get educated and do this and that, whatever. I want to be like that, right? So I think that those are the types of things that that relate to the intersectional framework. The challenge, though, is when I think about the myth of meritocracy, and there's a lot of folks who've written about that, including like Lanny Guinier, Rich Milner write about that quite a bit as well, is that when Black folks make it, they forget about all the folks who might not have made it, and they think that perhaps because of some good choices that they've made, and there are some good choices, that they have the right to leave all the folks behind who haven't. And in some ways, you can't be responsible for the peril of everyone. And I get that on the body, but you have to really see yourself kind of as a member of a community that are collectively striving for liberation. The other thing is that the evidence of privilege, I don't believe it. And I think that that's one thing we also got to challenge. You get a fancy car, you get a house. I'm not trying to negate the importance of material capital. I'm not trying to negate that. It's great to walk into a house that's heated, that that you own, but I'm not convinced that that's going to get us and keep us free. So us reproducing the middle class and the upper middle class, the ways that kind of U.S. discourses have been teaching us to do since the 1950s, since the post-GI Bill or whatever, like that's not going to get us free because it hasn't gotten white folks free either. You know what I mean? And the evidence of that is, look who's taking pills. Look who's still, y'all have all of these various resources that we've been trying to clamor for, but y'all aren't doing that great either. If I may say. So on the grand scheme of things, if you look globally, one thing I challenge also is the achievement gap discourse. We talk quite a bit about Black kids, Latino kids, aren't doing as well as white kids. But if you look at the data, white kids are only about 7th in the world, compared to the rest of the whole global system, right? So what we're doing is we're comparing Black and Latino kids to relatively mediocre white kids. I liken that to the middle class sensibilities that these Black children are being compared to. So what I think we should do is think beyond that, and I do think that one of the key things to do is not only question your privilege, but question the evidence of what you think privilege looks like and feels like.
But this goes back to, wow, you just like, okay, right, hold on. So what this feels like though, is this really that conversation about still this like assimilation or this proximity to whiteness. Like I feel like it always just kind of comes back down to like, this is the blueprint. So if we see that we are able to attain or achieve or certain things like this, that it's because it is likened to whiteness, well, then we've made it. And then there is this piece. But what you're saying is that we need to be careful about what we are even like looking at as greatness.
Absolutely.
Right?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Our producer says we have a great question here. So let's bring on the question.
Absolutely.
Thank you all for tuning in. Again, please put your comments in here. I think we have a question from Camille Wise. Julius, do we still have that on the screen? If not, then Rod, go ahead. You were about to make a point after my statement there. There we go. How do we balance privilege with the push to build generational wealth? Can these be balanced? Thank you, Camille. What do you think?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, definitely. Thank you, Camille. Brilliant question. The key thing in there is if you see her question, balance privilege with the push to build generational wealth. The key there is generational. And I think that right there lines with this notion of community, which I think is more important for people of color than I would say, white folks in the United States. White folks have been convinced that, hey, I work hard, pull myself up by my bootstraps, I go off, I do my thing, and I think that what middle-class sensibilities are trying to convince us of that. But like I just said, there is no freedom, there is no liberation if my family isn't free, if we're not all doing this together, right? And I think that that's one of the most difficult things about when you start to accumulate something. But what about the folks who haven't? So, but I do think that I don't see anything wrong with accumulating generational wealth. By far, we would be in such a better position if our forefathers were paid for the labor that they did. And I have photos on my phone of my own ancestors who were enslaved on the eastern shore of Maryland. So it's a very real thing for me, right? But I do wonder if they would have done with their wealth what the U.S. society is telling us to do with our wealth. When Black folks got free, we built a school, we built a church, right? Mary McLeod Bethune founded Bethune-Cookman College right on an old discarded near a garbage dump in Daytona. Sold fish sandwiches.
Somebody said our foremothers, and you just
our
said
foremothers. Absolutely.
You just mentioned, I love it.
You know what I mean? So I think about what we have done with what we have been given, what we have gotten. We give it back to the community. It's just in our nature. So I think that's key for the generational wealth question, Camille.
Listen, Rod, thank you so much, man. Listen, we're gonna we coming back all together. So again, like I told Stacey, let's keep the goodness brewing. Thank you so much to Dr. Roderick Carey. And then now, definitely my brother, Donovan Thompson, executive producer of the Grapevine TV and content creator. Donovan, go ahead and take your mute off, sir. I see that little line in between there. I want to hear your voice. There we go.
All right.
Donovan, listen, let me tell you, because I got a little nervous.
I don't get it.
I got a little nervous because I was like, I need my brother on here. I need this voice to round us on out tonight. As you've heard with, Stacey and Rod, like there's been some gems and some like edumacation drop. You hear what I'm saying? Some edumacation.
Yes, they sure did. I was over here like, yes, drinking my dark liquor. I love it. It's been great. It's been great.
I love it. Donovan, so thank you for being on. Donovan, I have a lot of respect for you, man. Let me just say that. And I've said this before, because this is your second time on The Naked Truth, and you were with us on the Black Male edition and like killed it. But I wanted to have you in this conversation around privilege because you and I have had some dope conversations, and I love your mind. So when you think about privilege, and I'm going to ask the same question I've asked Stacey and Rod, we'll start out with, when you think about being Black and privilege, like how does that resonate with you? What comes to mind? What connotation does that have? Just let's start there.
Well, I would say like I think about privilege a lot, just because I grew up in the hood in East New York, Brooklyn, with an immigrant mother that I lived with, a single mother. And I also saw what it was like to see people try again and not get many places, but try again. And then later on in life, I found out that that's a narrative for a lot of Black people. Yeah. But with the Grapevine and the work that we do, I've learned so much more about privilege because I've been able to identify that if your skin is light, you got some privilege if you Black. If that hair curls real loose and it's the deep wave, you got privilege as well. If you're a man and you are masculine and you're, right now in this day and age, if you have beard and you look like Idris Elba, you have some privilege. You know what I'm saying? And it can be so difficult to identify, as, the doctor has said, as well as Stacey, they've identified that it can be hard to see it. But because of being at this particular intersection, I've been able to see it a lot. Also being able to see the world through my mother's lens, single mother, being able to see what she's gone through. And I was able to identify this is a huge contrast to the white women that I've seen come into my life who can navigate the corporate spaces differently. White people can take advantage of nepotism. They can do a lot of things, including just driving down the street and not having to be harassed by the police. Yeah. That has really, really informed my idea of what privilege means. And I think more so than anything, like what I've identified is that white folks have compounded privilege. Compounded as in they were able to get land in this country. They're given the benefit of the doubt, which is a huge privilege with whatever it is. And Black folks are like compoundedly, systematically disenfranchised. So over generations, it's not just about a wealth gap. It's about all of the things that it's taken post-slavery to see how it's been kind of organized and designed that way. Yeah. Privilege keeps us separated. But what I hope we can get into is that I think that it can actually be a positive thing with awareness, privilege, versus being a negative thing without that awareness.
Okay, I want to get to that, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to save that for our panel discussion when we go in the end. Okay, so I'm marking that. Julius, please please remind me, Julius, because I want to keep going with this. I want to pivot just a little bit. Stacey talked about patriarchy, but she also mentioned something that I want to talk to you about that also that is personal to both you and I, talking about the privilege of heteronormativity, right? And we've talked about this in many different spaces of like what it means to be a cisgendered heterosexual man in the Black community. Because we're just talking about the Black community, right? Because I've done a lot of shows where we are talking to our trans community, our brothers and sisters of the trans community who are being murdered. Yeah. Right? Who are being murdered by Black cis heterosexual men. Cisgender and cisgender, because people have asked, like, what does that mean? Like, cisgender means is that you identify at the gender that you have identifies with the sex you were assigned at birth, and with your genitalia. So what are your thoughts on because the heteronormativity, like being a heterosexual Black virile man in the Black community, there's some privilege with that many of us that identify within the LGBTQIA community, we don't see. But then there's privilege even within the LGBTQIA community amongst Black people. I mean, we can talk about it all night long, but I wanted to have that conversation, open it up a little bit with you on that.
Yeah, no, that's fantastic. First of all, I just want to kind of like go back and acknowledge that, I think more than anything, there is a huge disdain for women. And I think that there's a huge disdain for femininity, and sexism is rampant, and within the Black community as well. And, this is going to be a little bit of a critique that will rub people the wrong way. But when you grow up in the Black community and you go to church every Sunday, and you see that your pastor has a whole bunch of men around him and did not give women any power, and they preached a sermon talking about, what this all looks like. I know for me, I remember being at church and them having these really, really homophobic sermons, and I just felt sick in the pit of my stomach that everybody in here hates me. So this idea of, I remember even my aunt one time, she said, I don't want to listen to a woman preach, especially if she has on lipstick, right? Like, we've come a long way. Don't get me wrong. We've come a long way, but we've been indoctrinated into a culture that hates women and that hates femininity. So if you are a man and growing up in the Black community where masculinity is a premium, okay? It's at a premium. If you cash that in for some good ass chips, you know what I'm saying? Like, it takes you far. For example, the permeation of hip hop culture, the permeation of jail culture, because of course we know that systemic racism has led to a lot of Black men being in jail. But the consequences of that is that femininity gets placed way, way, way on the back burner in terms of things that we aspire to. So when, for us, especially as gay Black men or people who are queer, we search for privilege everywhere we can find it. So if that means that I'm not going to tell anybody I'm gay until I have no choice, some people say I'm not going to come out until I find a man, right? Or if, we as gay men, we avoid trans women like I did in hopes that I wouldn't be drawn into the outness of their transness because I was ashamed, that was a learning experience for me. I have a trans cousin, a trans woman. And I had to learn over probably, like, I would say this took me about a year and a half of like interacting with her and getting to know her better as who she fully is, as opposed to the idea of who I thought she was, right? So I learned to love herself, and I learned to love her better, and it subsequently helped me love myself better. And I acknowledge the homophobia, the sexism, the lack of bravery that I had within me as somebody who goes around often and talks about privilege and what it's like to be at an intersection. So I think that privilege can be a blind spot, right? I
want you to prime us for the panel discussion. And you had mentioned talking about privilege, though, that there's a positive side of it. What lead us into that? Let's talk a little bit about that.
Absolutely. So one of the things that I've noticed is that the awareness factor. If you are aware that you have privilege, you can then wield your power for good, right? So one of the things that I experience often being in media is that we oftentimes have Black gatekeepers. Black gatekeepers, people who have made it to the right under VP level, because they ain't gonna give you VP too easily. So right under VP, capping out at director, right? So the directors that I've seen oftentimes are Black men, right? Black men who quietly but outwardly have aspired to whiteness, have aspired to a white woman, have aspired to impressing their white counterparts by being like, look, I snagged one of your white bitches too, that very dark kind of like passive aggressive thing that leads us towards very anti-Black behavior. You know what I'm saying? So seeing that, and then I've also seen a lot of gatekeepers who are biracial, people who are lighter in complexion. So just using that as an example right now. In understanding your privilege as a Black man in this position, or a biracial person who oftentimes white people do use as buffers, right? You have to be able to see that and then say, I'm going to make room. I'm going to make room in my next hire. I'm going to make room in who I decide is going to come in and partner with us. I'm going to make room for new influencers. I'm going to make room for Monroe.
Can I say this though? Can I say this? The reason why we don't do that, and would you say that the reason why Black folks may not be prone to do that is because, like, listen, in this system that we're in, it seems like there's only room for one of us, right? So there, speak to that piece where there is this piece on, like, listen, if I bring you in, like, there ain't a whole bunch of spots. There ain't a whole bunch of us. So how would you go on and sip? Because you, but how would you address that? How would you speak to that? Because I feel like that is probably one of the reasons why other people in these positions will not utilize their privilege to give access to other people.
Right. Well, I'm going to tell you like this. We come from the maroon people. We come from African people. We come from civil rights leaders and African Americans in America. We come from Haitians who revolted against the French under unsurmountable odds. I think that we are disillusioned by, somebody said crabs in the barrel.
Yeah.
Yes. I think we are disillusioned by what someone describes as superficial things, like houses and cars and women and flights and traveling and all of those kinds of things, that we miss the opportunity to have real substantial lives. What does power mean to us? What does revolution mean to us? And I'm going to be honest, I think that a lot of this is fantasy. I think that for a lot of us, we're so far removed from those those restaurant counters where people got their heads bashed in just so that they can get to the next step of feeling like a human. For us, it's shifted. It's shifted to getting likes. It's shifted to becoming famous. It's shifted to things that are so superficial that we don't understand that it is of extreme consequence that we let Black people through. It is extreme consequence that we change this 6% to 10% to 15% and see how far we can take this shit. It's important that we see that as Black Americans, we have privilege. We can take our blue passports and go to Ghana and start a business.
And I know when you came back from Ghana, like, you were like, yo, sign me up. I remember when you came back from that trip, you were Donovan, listen, I got folks here. I got your colleagues that are like, they in your comments like, preach, Donovan. So I'm going to bring them back on. While we're bringing them back on, let's look at this. It says, this great dialogue. I lived in a bubble as a programmed Christian until my daughter came home and told me she was gay. Changed my mind, heart and soul, a beautiful person who gives her heart to the community. I now make room for all that love. Now, this is personal to me because this is my goddaughter. And this is my goddaughter niece. This is my goddaughter baby mama. Like, this is my heart and my love. So JC, I love you. Thank you for sharing that comment, because again, we've come from a lot of the same stock and the same upbringing. Let's bring our panel back, because listen, Donovan, I was like, listen, yo folks in here talking about they running laps. Rod done already offered you a guest lecture spot. You did Delaware.
I'm there.
Like, I'm just saying, listen. And we're seeing some of these. We're seeing some of the reactions from the audience. So Donovan was talking about like using privilege. Oh, she's crying. I love you, JC. I love you, baby. You know, Donovan was talking about using the privilege, and I brought up the piece on, people being afraid to you, black people. I want to get this straight. This is a conversation within the community, right? Tonight, when they usually say what goes on in this house stays in this house, well, we having a conversation tonight. So grandmamas and everybody, aunties, if you're gonna get mad at me, I'm sorry, but we need to have it. Yes, this panel is fire. But Rod, Stacey, like, what are your thoughts on, like, this piece on how privilege can be used in a positive way, and how have you seen that? Stacey, I'll come to you first.
Yeah, so I struggle with this one, Donovan.
Okay.
And I think because when I think about privilege, I think about the intersection of privilege and power. And I realize to like really use my privilege, like I can use it in sort of superficial ways, performative ways. Like, okay, I may hire someone that looks like me, or I may let this one person through, but am I really willing to dismantle these systems that maintain the benefits that I get from this privilege, right? Especially if I'm thinking about like colorism, educational elitism, like that you talked about the gatekeepers, right? And the power that I have in front of this little desk that I get to keep? Like, what happens when there's too many of us in this space? What happens when there's enough of us in this space that they coming for my job and me? What happens when folks want to call me out on my shadiness, right? Because I'm an imperfect human as well. And maybe I'm like, I'm gonna hire Black folks. And then the Black folks I hire come at my light skin privilege. And I'm like, wait a minute, hold on a second. I'm not actually trying to go there. I just kind of wanted to get a few folks hired. So like, I think that it's really important for us to like lean into that and unpack sort of, especially from the lens of folks who are the oppressed in that intersection, to speak to what is me using my privilege looking like. Because a lot of times that's me getting out the hell out the way.
Yeah.
Right? Wow. A lot of times that's me shutting the fuck up. Because you actually don't need more of my voice. If I'm talking about colorism, you don't need my voice at that table. Talking about my history, right? We need to open up that space, and I need to examine my own shit in that way, right? It doesn't help for me to talk about me not feeling like I belong in the Black community or belong in the white community. Like, nah, like we need to really open up that space to have those truth conversations. And that shit, that kind of hurts.
I know it's not easy, but that thing is good, because I know for me, I'm going to give you really one quick example. So the show that I'm on, that I produced, called The Grapevine, I'm doing that with a woman with very African features. She is not somebody that Madison Avenue wants to see coming through talking about, I have a TV show for prime time. That's not a thing. And also, you know, the steps before that is that in corporate America, with her big booty and her big lips and her big nose, they were looking at her like, what, who is this Amazonian person that they got and that they brought up in here? But I hired her, and that allowed her to, as somebody who had the privilege of that space, and it allowed her to get the job to fund the show that now has then brought me into this space, and that has been able to take her into different spaces as well. And I think that what we don't understand is that when you leave that door open, right, that idea of dropping the ego, you don't have to get everything right. Everything doesn't have to be the most up to white folks' standard, because somebody said mediocrity. I don't know how your experiences have been, but I've seen a lot of mediocrity from white folks in the spaces in which I've been. So that exchange and holding us to that white folks level standard is just not something that I personally subscribe to. So I think that we have to reimagine that. And as a gatekeeper, as a Black man, as a light-skinned person, whoever you are, whatever privilege that you have to be willing to almost be an operative.
Yeah.
You have to almost be the, okay, absolutely, Sam. You know that white voice that we do when it comes to, some of us don't do it anymore, but some of us, hi, good morning. You know, you let that be your moment so that you can give access to people who look like you. Yeah. And that level of awareness is important.
Yeah, Rod, go ahead.
That's it. Like I can't remember who wrote this, but I was reading this thing about working the cracks, and I think that's kind of what Stacey and Donovan you're talking about. Is like, once you get your foot in the door, once you're in there, you start to work the cracks. But at the same time, it's that you don't start to. I think another thing that we have to resist is this notion of tokenism. Like some Black folks really like to be the only Black person in a room.
Oh wow!
Because what it does is it justifies white folks to look at you like, oh yeah, you did it, and it makes you feel good, and it makes you like, well, I'm not like the rest of them. And I think we have to really resist that and start to agitate and build policies for folks that look like us, and direct, like you said, Stacey, direct resources to the communities that we care about. But I do think that's resisting this tokenism that white supremacy thrives on. It needs it. It needed a Barack Obama, right, to justify the countless other boys and men that weren't able to ascend to his level, right? So I think that those are some things we really need to like conceptualize and think about, right?
I want to think, because there's a very important election coming up. So I just want to drop this in and get your thoughts on that. I've mentioned this on another show where I was like, Black privileged individuals could be very dangerous in this election if they ride on the fact that, like, you know what, my 401k is fine. I got my house, I got my job. We good. Listen, if another 4 years of Donald Trump, like, yes, it's gonna be bad emotionally for us. I don't want it, but like, I'm good. Like, what would you say to folks? And I had another sister on, Kula Koenig, a sister from Sacramento, who was on when we did The Truth About Your Vote, and she was like, if my neighbor's not good, I'm not good.
Yeah.
So like this whole notion of like, you know, I'm good over here. Like, how would you speak to that? And what would you specifically say to someone? Because if they are apathetic about the vote and who's in office. Anybody can jump in.
I'm gonna let one of y'all take that. I said the last thing.
Yeah, I mean, you know, I think that again, we've seen, right, like 4 years of devastating policies, and especially when we're thinking about intersectionality and how we navigate these worlds in our Blackness, right? Like thinking about how I felt as a semi-documented person, right, like an immigrant, and the pain within immigrant communities as we're thinking about, like, I think, Donovan, it might have been you talking about that blue passport. Mine is red.
Yeah.
And I have a criminal record. And I'm like, oh, if I leave with my green card and my criminal record and my red passport, what will happen when I try to cross that border? And will I be held somewhere because of somebody's executive orders about XYZ? And so I think that Kula's got it, right? Like, we're not free until we're all free. And I feel like that's any form of privilege. That's beyond voting. That's like, why do we try to find acceptance and meaning in the white gaze, right? Like, why is that the space where we get to express our privilege? And yes, we have to vote, even if we're voting against something, right? Like, that's important at this moment. And we have to reimagine voting and reimagine what democracy looks like in this season, because lots of folks are feeling like, hey, is it the devil we know or the devil we know, right? Like, no pun intended on the word devil. So like, but sometimes that means, again, it's what are we willing to give up? So sometimes that means I'm gonna make a sacrificial vote. I might not agree with all of these things, but I know on behalf of my community, if I don't express myself in this way, then we know what comes after that, right?
No, I appreciate that, Stacey. We have a question about oppression and privilege, so let's bring that on. Do you think that oppressed and privilege goes back to slavery and the light-skinned slaves having house privilege over the dark slaves? Now, we've talked about colorism. Anybody who wants to jump in on that, what are we thinking?
Well, I mean, I think that this is something that's real. You know, absolutely. I think that there is a kind of a certain amount of privilege that not only comes with race, but also that comes with color. And, you know, there are folks that are actually moving away from just looking at race, but also looking at color as an identity and phenotype as an identity, not even just color, but kind of nose, eye features, kind of beard, hair, all of that as kind of aligning with various amounts of privilege. Now, does all of it go back to slavery? I don't know. I'm not a historian, but I would say there's definitely some kind of some precedence with that. You know, the plantation owner raping Black women and then kind of showing some sort of favoritism to the child of that non-consensual sexual encounter. That has definitely been seen as the case. Do we still see evidence of that? I do think that there's some much more acceptability for lighter skinned black folks, and in that way, in some ways, I have benefited from that privilege. You know. But I've also kind of gone down with my privilege because of my hair. So there's your intersectionality argument right there, Stacey. You know, but I don't want to dominate the time.
Listen, does anybody have just a response to that? And then we're going to wrap up. Stacey, it looks like you got something to say. Go ahead.
Yeah, I think that we got to talk about anti-Blackness, right? And like where we fall in this proximity to whiteness, white supremacy. And I think that, you know, when we're thinking about light-skin privilege, it falls into that, right? And, you know, we talk about people of color and we talk about racism and we talk about kind of this blanket sort of system. In reality, we got to talk about like the ideology, the belief systems, the mindsets that perpetuate anti-Blackness.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so that, you know, that showed up on slave plantations. It shows up in Indian caste systems. It shows up in our own communities, right? And the way that we feel about what we think is beauty and what isn't beauty. But I think anti-Blackness is the place that we go to examine that.
Listen, Donovan, I want to give you the last word, brother.
Okay.
Are you in here? You in there? You good?
I think so. Am I here? Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you, brother. Go ahead. You got the last word.
Okay. All right. So very quickly, I just wanted to talk about the way in which that, especially in America, we.
Oh my goodness. Ah.
Uh-oh. That was about to be brilliant.
I know. You know when he's revving up. Oh my God. Donovan.
That was about to be so good.
I know. I already know. I know. Listen, I was afraid of that. I was trying to give him the last word. Donovan, are you back? Donovan, are you there? Come on, brother.
That was the mic drop.
Speak fast. Speak fast. He's still frozen.
No. Oh my goodness.
Okay.
Listen,
we got Donovan. I'm gonna listen, brother. Type your comment. Type it somewhere. Listen, I want to thank all three of you. So people are like, yo, the panel was fire. Stacey, thank you. I love you. I appreciate you. You're amazing. Rod, thank you, my brother, for being here tonight and for sharing your wisdom and insight. Donovan, my brother, as always, drop the mic, Donovan Thompson. Thank you so much for bringing everything that you bring to all of these spaces. This is the Naked Truth Experience. Again, for all of you, we are here every Thursday night at 9 p.m. Eastern, right here on Facebook and YouTube. I'm going to ask each one of you to please, please, please tell a friend. Tell a friend. As you can see, we are bringing the relevant conversation unapologetically, right? And I am working hard to make sure that the people that come before you on this platform, they know what they're talking about. They've done their work. They're human. They're imperfect, but they are willing to be vulnerable and they are willing to put it all out there on the line. So keep coming back and telling somebody. Again, we have our next episode, which is next week. We're going to be doing part 2 of the American Dream, the myth. Come back for that. We have a brother and a sister who have butted the system, and who defied the odds and who have said, this is the path that I'm going to take. So please, please make sure you come back for that. Always, always, always like, share, subscribe, comment, do all of that stuff. Please find us on our social media spaces. You can see that on there. And then make sure that you join the Naked Truth Facebook group, y'all. The Naked Truth Facebook group, because that's where we're going to continue the conversation. Again, I thank you for joining us. This is the end of episode 23. And as I always say, everybody have a wonderful night. I'll see you next week.